Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 8-game Major League Baseball slate. This features all the games today, so you don't have to worry about other games at all. Uh, let's look at the weather first. I forgot to pull that up here, so let me pull that up. But we do have some fun games on this slate. We have a game in Colorado, which definitely can cause chaos in fantasy. And we have a couple issues with weather. So Milwaukee and Philly. That definitely has some weather concerns, so it looks like it'll play, but there could be a delay there. And then even the Colorado game has a light rain potential for some, but it should be a play. Just could have some rain. The Nationals game also has a little bit of rain. The question here is Washington is kind of silly um, with their situation, so that could be a riskier play right there. But because they sometimes will call a game even when there's no weather around. But I do think all three games play. The Philly game has the biggest risk of the three overall. So let's go ahead and get into our pitching here. So we have some interesting pitchers on the slate. I have a top overall play in Verlander for Houston against St. Louis. Now, St. Louis projects the worst on this slate, and Verlander has been absolutely phenomenal in 3 of the last 4 games. Obviously, he's had a pretty easy schedule in that slate, but this is another easy team to go against. So he's got a lot of upside here. I do think a couple of bats on St. Louis have some potential, but he's really improved the last few games, and his strikeout rate has returned, and that has and his pitch count is now normalized. So I think he's in a great spot, and he's my favorite pitcher on the slate. Part of why because everybody has pretty tough matchups, and he's cheaper than a lot of the options. So he's in a good spot here and a nice price. But Skubal is a pretty decent, expensive option, a GPP play here. Now, Skubal has the best K rate on the slate, along with Verlander, probably. So I think that he's a pretty solid slate option as he has a high ceiling. He does have a very tough matchup against Texas, but I do think that Texas is one of the teams that's going to struggle a little bit today just because of how good Skubal can be. He's been really solid so far this season. Wheeler is also in a good spot against Milwaukee. Now, Milwaukee can definitely hit the ball well. He doesn't have he also has a high ceiling just like Skubal does, and he's got a good K rate as well. He's only had one game over the last 8 games under 21 fantasy points, so that gives him a pretty safe floor. However, this is a tougher situation, and he's had somewhat of an easy schedule. The pretty much the one tough team he's played was Texas, and he really hasn't played too many tough teams in that stretch. But he has a good opportunity here to continue to have a good season. Gore is an interesting play for Washington as he's got a good matchup against the Mets, probably one of the weaker teams that actually, in the bottom half of this slate. And he's a decent pitcher. He's not as good as some of the others, and it's going to be harder for him to get a win here. But he has had 2 straight 30 fantasy point games, and he had one of those against Atlanta and Seattle. So he's got some good upside on the slate, regardless, as he has a good K rate. Uh, uh, Rodriguez for Baltimore has a tough matchup against Toronto. Now, this is where the K rate starts to drop off a little bit, but he's still a GPP play today. He's not in a great matchup, but he's one of the he's a decent pitcher, and so he's definitely a GPP play on the slate. I also think Kevin Gossman is a GPP, even though he's got a very tough matchup against Baltimore. He's probably got a pretty good ceiling, but he probably won't hit it. But I do think he can get a 15 to 25 fantasy point game. And if he can get up in the north half of that, then he can pay off. But he's definitely a high risk play. He's definitely a contrarian option on the slate at a GPP situation. Then we'll look at Texas and Detroit's pitcher, Evaldi. Now, he has had a pretty good up and down season. His strikeout rate is very inconsistent, which is really hampers his fantasy output. But if he gets a lot of strikeouts, and he can definitely do that today against Detroit, then he can be a boom or bust play. He's had 4 games over 22 fantasy points and 4 games under 11 in his 8 starts. And it's really just determining his strikeouts here for the most part. He's probably not going to give up a bunch of home runs at least, so that's a good advantage here for him. But he's definitely a boom or bust play on this one. And then we'll look at Waldron for San Diego against the Angels. He's got one of the better matchups here, and he actually has in this few games he's played. He's had some good strikeout games. In fact, in the last 4 games, he's had 6 or more strikeouts in all 4. He's also had 2 wins in that stretch, and this is definitely a winnable game for the Padres. And so he is a extreme GPP play, but he has flashed some good upside. So he's definitely worth a look, kind of as a Hail Mary play, kind of. But he's definitely interesting today. Tyler McGill is also an extreme GPP play. He's cheap. He hasn't been terrible so far. He's only given up a couple earned runs in his 3 starts so far. He hasn't gotten a win though, and his team doesn't seem to like to score runs when he pitches. But he does have a decent strikeout rate, so he's definitely interesting. This matchup isn't ideal, but is okay. I do think Washington is a good team to stack today, at least a little bit. So let's go ahead and get into our batters now. So I do have 3 core plays in Brendan Rodgers, Alex Bregman, and Sean Bouchard for Colorado and Houston, respectively. These guys are well priced and have a lot of upside in this one. And we'll get into the rest of the pitcher bats now. So for catcher, this slate is pretty weak at catcher. We really only have 2 guys that jump off the page as great plays, and Yanir Diaz is one of them for Houston. He's $3,500. I was very close to making him a core play, except for the fact that you can make the 2 catchers that catch in Colorado today as viable options as well. But Diaz is got to have the best opportunity here to have a solid game. He hadn't hit a lot of home runs, but he's got multi-hit potential. I know he hadn't done much the last few games, but the metrics do jump off the charts today, and he really hasn't looked all that great the last few games from a metrics perspective. He finally does today, so he's definitely one of my top plays. Danny Jansen for Toronto, also another option. He has hit the ball pretty well this season. He has some home run metrics for the slate, so he's definitely worth a look as well, though he's a little bit more expensive. Whoever starts for Cincinnati and Colorado, which it looks like would be Tyler Stevenson and Elias Diaz, would be the top options from that game. However, they don't really carry the best metrics for this particular slate. Looking at first base, this position is pretty deep. Bryce Harper does jump off the page as the top overall guy, though he is extremely expensive today. He has hit the ball pretty well lately, so he does get some nice upside as a result, but he does need a home run to pay off here. But he does have those metrics for that today. Another guy I like a lot today, and I don't usually like him much, is Chris Bryant. I liked him a couple games ago. I don't know if it was this Cleveland game, but I did like him a couple games ago, and he did pretty well. So he has some really good metrics today. He's got the perfect storm for situations, so he's definitely somebody I would consider looking at on the slate. Though he does carry some risk because he's been absolutely abysmal so far this season. Pete Alonso also looks decent today, though he's fairly expensive on the slate, so he's kind of a high risk, high reward play. A couple other options that I like here, though, are Hunter Goodman, who can also play in the outfield. He also fits out there well. He doesn't typically have a huge fantasy upside, as you can see, but he does have some good home run potential today. And if he can get a couple hits, then he can also pay off because he doesn't need a ton for this price point. Excuse me. Vlad Jr. and Christian Walker are both contrarian options at this position, as they do have decent fantasy metrics as well. And then Spencer Steer and Jeimer Candelario for Cincinnati, they do slot in here, and they do have a lot of upside being in Colorado, but they don't have the best metrics for the slate, so they're just contrarian options at this point. Looking at second base, Altuve is the top overall player at this position. He is very expensive. He has not done a lot in the last few games, but he does have hitting upside. Assuming he draws a start, he'll be in play. But Brendan Rodgers is a core for me, as he just looks really good today. He's got absolutely fantastic metrics for the slate, and I do like his upside here for a home run as well. Even though he hasn't hit many so far, just 2, he does have that good metrics for this particular matchup. And then Jonathan India is kind of a contrarian option for Cincinnati. Cincinnati looks good because they're in Colorado, but that's pretty much it today. A lot of them don't have a lot of great metrics on this one, but he's one of the better options, so he's definitely worth a look. Third base here, we'll look at Bregman here. He's the top overall play at this position. He's fairly priced. He's improved his hitting since the beginning of the season. He's had some really good games lately. He's also hitting home runs, so he's definitely in play on this one. Manny Machado is a good contrarian option for San Diego against if you want to go away from Bregman, as he does draw good metrics as well. Candelario can also fit here for Cincinnati, but again, he doesn't have the best metrics, but he just has the best situation. Looking at shortstop, Ella De La Cruz. He has been absolutely fantastic when he gets on base. However, he has struggled a little bit to get on base the last few games. He's only had 1 steal in the last 6 or 7 games. He does need to get a couple of steals to pay off here or a home run because he is extremely expensive, but he will eventually have a crazy game. And this is definitely a situation where the metrics align for him to have that kind of game. CJ Abrams, if he was to play today, he would be somebody to consider, but he didn't play yesterday, so hopefully he'll be back today. But he does have great metrics for today if he does start. And then Tover for Colorado. He's an interesting option today as well. I think Colorado is actually a very favorable stack today, and he's one of the better options on the slate, though he's fairly expensive. A couple other options at this position, but I don't particularly love, but he's okay, is Lindor for the Mets and also Gunnar Henderson for Baltimore. They both carry decent metrics today, but they're definitely contrarian options off of the top overall guys. And then Kim for San Diego is kind of a good cheap value play at this position. This position is kind of weak, so I think just going with Kim to help you pay up at other positions is a good opportunity. Or if you go with super cheap option, with like Nito or something like that too, you could do that. Looking at outfielders, we have quite a few outfielders that we do like today, and I'm going to switch over to my sheet here. But Bouchard is the top overall option, and he has great home run metrics for the slate, so he has a lot of potential. I know he's only had one home run on the season, but his metrics are off the charts for the slate, and so I think he's one of my favorite plays overall. Excuse me, I'm a little sniffly this morning. Let's look at our outfielders here. So we have Alvarez, Tucker, Corbin Carroll, and Tatis Jr. Is our top slate guys. I do like Alvarez a ton, and he's a lot cheaper than Kyle Tucker, so he's in a great spot. Corbin Carroll also looks really good. Tatis Jr. is a little bit pricey, but he's definitely a viable option. Schwarber, Fraley, and Benson all have some upside, but they're kind of contrarian today at the best. Benson is a guy you could slip in there. If you want to go with a Mets stack, Nemo and Marte are definitely going to fit in there. However, they're kind of contrarian options, and Hunter Goodman, he can play at first base or in the outfield, and I think he's a great solid play. And then a couple of value guys, Yastrzemski, Peterson, and Bouchard. I love Bouchard today. And then Peterson actually does look pretty good for Arizona too, especially if you go with a Corbin Carroll Peterson stack there. You can definitely do that. We do have a few sub $3,000 plays. None of these are very good except for Robbie Grossman, but I'll get that in a minute. So we have Gallo for Washington, Keibert Ruiz for Washington, Mickey Manayak for LA Angels, and then Grossman for Texas. Grossman does have really good metrics for this one, and I'll show you that down here at the best metric plays. The top options here, that were Bouchard and Alvarez. I really did want to make Alvarez a core play, but I don't like making over $5,000 guys core plays. But he would definitely be the best on from that perspective. But Altuve, Bryce Harper, David Schneider, and Robbie Grossman all carry really good upside here. And then Tatis Jr., Brendan Rodgers, and Gunnar Henderson also have absolutely fantastic metrics today. Looking at our stacks here, we have some incredible stacks on this slate with Cincinnati and Colorado. I do think Colorado's stack is actually a little bit better than Cincinnati simply because the pricing and stuff is a lot better. And Cincinnati's stack is pretty expensive, and while a lot of the guys look pretty good, they don't look great. Then the next few stacks of Philly, Arizona, San Diego, and Houston. All these stacks are kind of your tried and true type stacks today. These guys have a lot of potential. Fairly expensive today, and they're not as deep as some of them that I like. Houston's stack looks absolutely phenomenal, though it's extremely expensive. The San Diego stack looks pretty good. Arizona is kind of a contrarian stack, and then Philly looks like a good stack as well, but is top heavy. The next three with San Francisco, Washington, Baltimore. These are three stacks that two teams I don't typically like to stack in San Francisco and Washington, but they look really good today. And then Baltimore does look good, but they're kind of up and down. So I think they're high risk, high reward. And then these next set, the Angels to the Milwaukee Brewers. These stacks look very interesting on the slate. I really do like Toronto, New York Mets, Detroit, and Texas, and Milwaukee for that matter. I think Angels look a little bit risky because they just don't have a lot of bats. They have a lot of upside today. Excuse me. But all these stacks are guys kind of contrarian options that you could definitely win a GPP if you were to get the right one in there. And then St. Louis, they got the worst situation against Verlander, and this is going to be a tough one for them. So it's stackable, but it's definitely high risk, high reward. With that said, guys, this stack overall is pretty good. I do think that we have a pretty good, expensive, pretty fair slate for an 8-game slate. A lot of decent pitching, but nothing, over the top great. But I do think it's going to be a solid slate. I don't think it's going to be super high scoring, but I don't think it's super low scoring either. And then, doing some contrarian things is definitely going to help set you apart. And so that's how I'm going to be building lineups today. So with that said,